My biggest mistake was trusting too blindly. I thought loyalty was something you could feel in your bones, that love and blood would protect you from deception. I grew up believing that family meant safety, a place where no matter what happened, you could always come home. That belief became the foundation of everything I built, every decision I made, every dream I dared to chase. I never questioned it, not once. I thought trust was something pure, unbreakable, almost sacred. I gave it freely, without hesitation, because I believed good intentions were enough to keep people honest. I didn't see the small betrayals hiding in polite smiles, or the subtle lies tucked behind reassuring words. I thought that if I worked hard, if I was kind, if I stayed loyal, no one I loved would ever turn on me. Family dinners, laughter, shared secrets, all of it felt real. I didn't notice how carefully certain truths were being hidden from me, how conversations stopped when I entered the room. I mistook silence for peace. I mistook distance for love expressed differently. I told myself stories to fill the gaps, stories that made the people I loved seem incapable of cruelty. It's strange how easily love can blind you, how it wraps you in comfort until you can't see the danger right in front of you. I saw warning signs. I just didn't want to believe them. I ignored the way their glances lingered too long when money or property came up. I brushed off the way my cousin's compliments always had an edge to them. I convinced myself that envy and betrayal didn't exist in families like mine. Trust, when given too freely, becomes a weapon. I didn't know that back then. I handed them my confidence, my faith, my vulnerability, and they used it to cut deeper than any enemy ever could. It's one thing to be betrayed by a stranger. You expect that. But when it comes from someone who once held your hand and who once swore to protect you, it breaks something inside that doesn't easily heal. I remember the first moment doubt crept in. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper. A look exchanged between my parents and my cousin. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room. I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining things. After all, why would the people who raised me ever hurt me? Why would blood ever turn against its own? Maybe that's the cruelest part of betrayal, how quiet it begins. It doesn't shout. It seeps in slowly, disguised as concern, wrapped in false affection. You never realize you're losing everything until the ground gives way beneath you. You tell yourself they love you, even when their actions say otherwise. You keep making excuses, because admitting the truth feels like losing your entire foundation. I kept giving them chances, thinking love would fix what was breaking. I thought if I proved my loyalty enough times, they'd remember theirs. I kept defending them to others, silencing my own doubts, carrying the weight of their lies because I was too afraid to believe they were capable of such cruelty. That's what blind trust does. It turns you into your own jailer. The day I finally saw the truth, it didn't come with shouting or chaos. It came with silence, the kind that follows after the final illusion breaks. Every memory rewrote itself in my mind. Every moment I thought was innocent now painted with betrayal. I realized how long I'd been standing on a fault line, mistaking tremors for normal family tension. The truth was always there. I just refused to look. Sometimes I wonder if they planned it all, or if it just happened. One small lie leading to another until deceit became routine. But deep down, I know the answer doesn't matter. What matters is how easily trust can be twisted, how love can be used as a disguise for greed, and how blindness, when chosen, becomes its own kind of betrayal. I didn't just build a house with bricks and wood. I built it with my sweat, tears, and dreams. Every corner carried a piece of me. Every wall echoed with the sound of my effort. I remember the nights I stayed awake, planning every detail, picturing how sunlight would fall across the living room floor. That house wasn't just a structure. It was my heartbeat turned into walls and windows. Each decision, from the color of the paint to the smallest fixture, had a story. I chose the front door because it reminded me of hope. Strong, welcoming, unshakable. I picked the garden spot because that's where I wanted peace to grow. a place where I could breathe after long days of struggle. Nothing about that house was random. It was built with intention, with purpose, with love that only comes from someone who's been through too much and still chooses to dream. I can still remember the smell of new wood mixed with rain on the first day the foundation was poured. My hands were dirty, but my heart was full. I didn't care about perfection. I cared about belonging. I wanted to create something that would outlast pain, something that would remind me that no matter what the world took from me, I could still build. That house became proof that I could turn survival into beauty. It wasn't just about walls and a roof. It was about identity. It was the first thing that was truly mine. Not inherited, not gifted, not borrowed. I had earned every inch of it. I had worked double shifts, skipped sleep, saved every spare coin to make it real. When I finally held the keys in my hand, it felt like the universe had acknowledged my existence, like it was whispering, "You made it. You belong somewhere now." But when they came for it, when they tried to claim it as theirs, it wasn't just about property. It was about power. They didn't want the house because they needed it. They wanted it because I had built it. It was pride disguised as cruelty, jealousy pretending to be justice. They wanted to strip me of the one thing that proved I didn't need their approval to create something beautiful. Every legal paper they filed, every threat they made, felt like a knife twisting deeper into something sacred. It wasn't just an attack on my stability. It was an attempt to rewrite my story. They wanted to erase every trace of my independence, to remind me that in their world, I was never meant to rise. They wanted my silence, my submission, and they thought taking my home would give them that. I remember standing in the doorway one morning, the light spilling across the floor I had laid myself. I touched the walls and felt the memories pressed into them. Laughter, late nights, small victories that no one else saw. I realized then that they weren't just trying to steal a building. They were trying to take my history, the evidence that I had survived everything they thought would destroy me. It's a strange kind of pain, watching something you created become a battlefield. You feel powerless, but you also feel a fierce kind of rage, the kind that comes when someone tries to destroy what your soul built. I felt every ounce of it, but I stayed quiet, knowing that silence sometimes carries more strength than shouting ever could. They thought taking away my house would take away my spirit. They thought I would crumble without the walls I built, but they didn't understand that the house was never the real victory. The victory was the strength that made it possible, the fire that refused to die even when everything was taken away. When I saw their signatures on the papers, claiming what was mine, I didn't see family anymore. I saw strangers wearing familiar faces, people who could smile while dismantling everything I had worked for. I realized then that their goal wasn't just to own my home. It was to erase me from my own story, to pretend my hands never built anything worth keeping. When they said, "It's just business," my heart broke, but my spirit woke up. Those words echoed in my head, sharp and cold, like the final nail sealing away everything I had believed in. I had thought what we built together was rooted in loyalty and love, not profit and power. But in that moment, I understood. To them, I was never family. I was just another piece of the deal. I can still hear the tone they used, casual, dismissive, almost indifferent. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was disbelief. How could something I poured my soul into be reduced to a transaction? They had looked me in the eyes, smiled, and told me it wasn't personal. But to me, it was everything personal. Every word, every lie, every manipulation, all of it had my name written on it. That one phrase became the line that separated who I was from who I was about to become. Before that day, I was naive enough to believe that fairness always wins, that good intentions would be recognized. After that day, I learned that justice doesn't come from waiting. It comes from fighting for it yourself. My innocence cracked, but in its place, something unshakable started to grow. I started replaying every moment in my mind, every decision, every conversation. The signs had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The way they excluded me from meetings, the sudden shift in tone when money was mentioned, the fake sympathy whenever they made a move behind my back. It was never just business. It was betrayal wearing a professional mask. My heart may have broken that day, but something inside me shifted. Pain turned into focus. I stopped crying over what I lost and started watching how they operated. I began to understand the way power hides behind polite words, how greed dresses itself up as logic, and how betrayal is always justified with excuses that sound reasonable to everyone except the one being betrayed. Justice stopped being an abstract word for me. It became personal, deeply personal. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about balance, about restoring what they had taken from me without permission. They thought I would walk away quietly, but they didn't realize that breaking my heart was the same as setting my determination on fire. I started documenting everything, every email, every message, every whispered deal. They thought they were outsmarting me, but I was studying them, patiently, quietly. I wanted the truth to come out not in anger, but in clarity. I wanted them to feel the same cold realization I felt when they said, "It's just business." Because for me, it was never about business. It was about betrayal disguised as professionalism. There's a strange clarity that comes when your trust has been shattered. You stop hearing the noise and start noticing patterns. You see how easily people justify cruelty when it benefits them. You start to understand that justice isn't always found in courtrooms or contracts. Sometimes it lives inside the heart of the person who refuses to forget what was done to them. I began to move differently after that. Every word I spoke was measured, every step deliberate. I was done playing the role of the trusting one. They had written me off as emotional, too soft to survive in their world. But what they didn't realize was that emotions, when controlled, are power. My heartbreak wasn't a weakness. It was the rebirth of someone they could no longer manipulate. When they said, "It's just business," they thought they were closing a chapter. What they didn't know was that they had just opened a new one where I would stop being the victim and start being the force they never saw coming. It wasn't just about money, reputation, or revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something much deeper, my right to decide how my story would be remembered. When I started collecting evidence, I wasn't just exposing their lies. I was discovering my own strength. At first, it felt like survival, like I was just trying to hold on to the last thread of sanity in a world built on deceit. But slowly, it became something more. Every file I opened, every inconsistency I uncovered, reminded me that I wasn't powerless. I was finally taking control of the truth they tried so hard to bury. In the beginning, I trembled every time I found a clue. My hands would shake, not from fear, but from the weight of realization. Each discovery cut deep, proof of how easily they had played with my trust. But alongside the pain came clarity. The lies that once blinded me now became maps guiding me to the truth. It was as if the very betrayal that broke me had also given me the strength to rise. I started keeping records, receipts, messages, contracts, everything. I learned to read between the lines, to see the meaning behind what wasn't written. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd stay the same naive person who believed their words. But I was evolving quietly, teaching myself how to fight in the only way they understood, with facts, not feelings. Every document became a piece of armor, every screenshot, a shield. The evidence stopped being just proof of their betrayal. It became the foundation of my awakening. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. I wasn't begging to be heard. I was preparing to be undeniable. And that shift changed everything. I realized how dangerous truth can be when you have the courage to hold it. They had built their empire on manipulation, on stories carefully edited to protect their image. But once I saw the cracks, I couldn't unsee them. I began connecting dots they never thought anyone would notice. Every hidden transfer, every forged signature, every false promise. It all started to form a picture they couldn't erase. Late at night, I would sit alone, surrounded by papers and silence. The same walls that once heard my pain now witnessed my determination. There was something empowering about watching the lies unfold in front of me. For years, they had convinced me that I was the problem. Too emotional, too sensitive, too naive. But the evidence said otherwise. The evidence told the truth they had always feared. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I stayed quiet, almost invisible. I let them believe I was broken, that I had accepted defeat. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence was my weapon. Every day they underestimated me was another day I grew stronger, another chance to gather more proof. I was no longer reacting to their games. I was rewriting the rules. The deeper I dug, the more I understood the power of truth. It doesn't shout. It waits. It builds quietly, patiently, until it's undeniable. And when it finally reveals itself, it doesn't just expose lies. It destroys the illusion that protected them. I could feel that moment coming closer with every page I turn. Sometimes I wondered if they ever suspected how close I was to unraveling everything. They carried on with their arrogance, thinking they were untouchable. But what they didn't know was that I had already built a fortress of evidence around their deception. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice shaped through precision, not anger. Every email, every hidden file, every careless mistake they made became part of my story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor who refused to be erased. In the end, those papers weren't just proof of their lies. They were proof of my resilience, my patience, and the quiet strength of someone who learned how to fight with truth instead of tears. I fell, but I never shattered. The impact was hard. It knocked the breath out of me, left me questioning everything I once believed in. There were moments when the pain felt unbearable, when the weight of disappointment pressed so heavy on my chest that I thought I'd never rise again. But even in that darkness, something inside me refused to break. I bent, I bruised, but I didn't collapse. There's a kind of power that's born in silence, in the moments no one sees, and that power started to grow inside me. I learned that falling doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it's the only way to see the ground you've been standing on. When everything around me crumbled, I was forced to look closely, to understand what was real and what was built on illusion. Pain stripped away the false comfort I'd been living in. It took away my illusions but gave me truth in return, and that truth became the foundation I started rebuilding myself on. Every betrayal I faced added something new to me, something solid. It didn't harden my heart. It strengthened my spirit. Each wound taught me where not to trust blindly. Each scar reminded me of what I survived. I began to see betrayal not just as destruction, but as transformation. They thought they were breaking me, but all they were doing was refining me. Tears became my quiet rebellion. They weren't signs of weakness. They were the cleansing of everything that no longer belonged to me. With every tear, I let go of guilt, shame, and fear. I realized that crying didn't make me fragile. It made me honest. It allowed me to feel everything fully, to face pain without pretending it didn't exist. And once I accepted it, it lost its power to control me. My vision became clearer, sharper, almost ruthless. I could see people's intentions without their words, feel the difference between truth and performance. It was like the fog had finally lifted. I stopped romanticizing loyalty that wasn't mutual and love that came with conditions. I stopped chasing validation from those who only valued me when I was useful to them. There's something about breaking down that teaches you exactly what you're made of. When the world turns its back, you meet the real version of yourself, the one that doesn't need applause, permission, or acceptance. That version of me rose from the ruins, steady and unafraid. The same pain that once made me cry now made me powerful. I had learned how to rise quietly, without needing anyone to notice. People saw my calm and mistook it for peace, but they didn't know the storms I had walked through to earn it. The calm wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. I had learned not to react to every attack, not to explain my worth to those determined not to see it. I started choosing silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood that strength doesn't always need to be loud. There were nights when I wanted to give up, when the exhaustion felt heavier than the fight. But then I would remember how far I had come, how many times I had already survived what should have destroyed me. That memory became my anchor. It reminded me that pain was temporary, but growth was permanent. I had fallen before, and I had always risen, stronger, smarter, and quieter. Each time I looked back, I saw not the girl who was broken, but the woman who learned to rebuild herself without asking for help. The falls stopped feeling like failures and started feeling like lessons. I stopped running from them and started embracing them. Every mistake, every betrayal, every heartbreak was a chapter that shaped me into someone unstoppable. I fell, yes, but I never shattered. The cracks only let more light in, and through those cracks I could finally see clearly who I was, what I deserved, and how much power I truly carried within me. When I exposed Sienna in front of everyone, I didn't just bring her down. I challenged an entire system built on deceit. The moment was electric, the kind that hangs in the air right before a storm breaks. Every eye in the room turned toward me, some filled with disbelief, others with fear. For so long, I had been the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who stayed silent while they rewrote my story. But that day, my silence ended, and my truth spoke louder than all their lies combined. I had prepared for that moment in secret, collecting every piece of evidence, every hidden message, every proof of her manipulation. She had built her power on the illusion of perfection, smiling in public, scheming in private. No one questioned her because her charm was her weapon. But charm can't survive exposure. When I laid out the truth, it wasn't just about proving her wrong. It was about tearing off the mask she had worn for years. The room fell, quiet as the truth unraveled. The same people who once praised her couldn't meet her eyes. I watched her confidence crumble, her carefully crafted facade dissolve into panic. For a long time, she had made me doubt myself, made me question my worth. But in that moment, every lie she ever told lost its power. I could finally see her for what she was, not untouchable, not powerful, just terrified of the truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth carried its own weight, and it echoed through that space louder than any accusation ever could. Sienna had always believed that control came from fear, but I learned that real control comes from knowledge. I had turned her own tactics against her, not with anger, but with precision. That's what made it powerful. She couldn't fight facts, couldn't argue with evidence, couldn't escape the truth that was finally catching up to her. People around us shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing that what I had exposed wasn't just about her. It was about all of them, too. She wasn't the only one guilty of deceit. She was just the most visible one. Everyone who stayed silent, who benefited from her lies, was part of the same system. The moment I spoke, the room became a mirror, forcing everyone to confront what they had ignored for years. I felt no satisfaction watching her fall. What I felt was release. For years I had carried the weight of injustice on my shoulders, too afraid to push back. But that day, the weight lifted. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming my truth. I was standing up not just for myself, but for everyone who had been silenced by manipulation, gaslighted into believing their pain didn't matter. The power dynamics shifted in an instant. The same voices that once doubted me now whispered in my defense. It wasn't validation I was looking for, but witnessing their disbelief turn into recognition gave me strength. It reminded me that truth doesn't need allies. It only needs courage. For the first time in a long time, I stood tall, unafraid, unshaken, and utterly free. That confrontation became more than just a personal victory. It became a statement. that no matter how powerful deception becomes, it will always collapse under the weight of truth. I realized that standing up to Sienna wasn't just about exposing one person. It was about exposing a pattern, a culture of silence that had protected people like her for far too long. As I looked around the room, I saw faces, some ashamed, some inspired. And in their eyes, I saw something shift. Maybe they wouldn't all speak up that day, but they had witnessed something that couldn't be undone. I had shown them that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear win. I had become what they never expected, a reminder that even the quietest voices can shake the ground when they choose to speak. That day, I wasn't just Mira anymore. I became the voice for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced. Every woman who was told to stay quiet, every person who was made to doubt their own truth. I carried them with me. And as Sienna's empire of lies began to crumble, I realized that exposing her wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something far greater, a reckoning that had been waiting for far too long. I learned that truth might take time, but it never loses. For a long while, it felt like my words were falling into an endless void, unheard, unseen, dismissed as noise. The lies were louder, more polished, easier for people to believe. They were convenient, while the truth was placated and uncomfortable. I watched how easily deception can dress itself in confidence, while honesty has to fight just to be seen. But even in that silence, I knew the truth was alive, waiting for its time. There were nights when I doubted if it was worth it, if truth really had any power in a world that rewards manipulation. Lies spread fast, like fire in dry grass, and I was just one voice trying to fight the flames with bare hands. But I kept going because somewhere deep inside, I understood that lies burn bright, but they burn out. Truth, on the other hand, stays. It endures. It might not shine immediately, but it doesn't die out. The hardest part was patience. Watching people believe falsehoods about me, watching them turn away, was a pain I can't describe. I wanted to scream, to make them see what I saw. But the truth doesn't rush. It doesn't need to beg for attention. It moves in silence, collecting strength, and when it finally arrives, it doesn't ask to be heard. It demands it. I had to learn that timing isn't weakness, it's strategy. Every day I held on to that belief like a lifeline. I reminded myself that silence wasn't defeat. Just because the world was quiet didn't mean it had forgotten. Every injustice, every betrayal, every lie had been recorded somewhere. Not on paper, but in the invisible balance of life that always tilts toward what's real. The truth was gathering momentum, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I started to see small cracks forming in the lies that had once seemed unshakable. People began to question, to hesitate, to notice what they had ignored before. It was slow, painfully slow, but it was happening. The same people who once looked at me with doubt began to look at her with suspicion. That's how truth works. It doesn't crash through the door. It seeps in quietly, and once it does, it can't be contained. There's something powerful about that moment when truth finally surfaces. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove. It simply is. Watching it unfold was like watching dawn break after a long, endless night. Gentle, but unstoppable. The lies that once seemed invincible started to collapse under their own weight, because that's what lies do. They destroy themselves eventually. The first time I saw people realize the truth, their faces said everything. Shock, guilt, disbelief, all mixed together. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift. The truth had taken its time, but it had arrived, and in that moment, I understood why it needed to. It wasn't just about proving me right. It was about teaching me patience, resilience, and faith in the quiet power of honesty. Every lie depends on silence to survive, and I had stopped being silent. My persistence became the truth's echo. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. I just needed to stay consistent. That's how truth wins, not through noise, but through endurance. It never loses because it doesn't compete. It simply waits until the world is ready to see. That moment of revelation changed everything. The same truth that once cost me everything became the force that rebuilt my life. People who once turned away now wanted to stand beside me. The tables didn't turn because of luck. They turned because truth had finally taken its rightful place. It was like the air had shifted, like justice had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I learned that truth doesn't chase recognition. It creates it. It doesn't fight for validation. It commands it. All it needs is one moment, one opening, one crack in the armor of lies. And when that moment comes, it doesn't just reveal what's real. It changes everything around it. My revenge wasn't cold. It was calculated. Tea wasn't a burst of rage or a moment of fury. It was quiet, deliberate, precise. Every move I made was planned with the patience of someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. I didn't act out of impulse. I acted out of clarity. Revenge, for me, wasn't about destruction. It was about restoration. It was about taking back what was mine, piece by piece, truth by truth. I spent nights studying their patterns, the way they lied, the way they moved, the way they controlled the narrative. They believed manipulation made them untouchable, that charm could erase corruption, that silence could bury guilt. They mistook my stillness for weakness, never realizing that while they were celebrating their victories, I was collecting data, recording every inconsistency, every slip of the tongue, every thread I could eventually pull. I learned early that emotion clouds precision. So, I removed emotion from the equation. No tears, no shouting, no scenes, just focus. I became the observer, the one who listens when others talk too much, the one who notices the details they assume no one will see. That's the thing about calculated revenge. It's not about inflicting pain. It's about creating consequence. And consequence is always quiet before it strikes. While they laughed and schemed, I was building my foundation. Evidence, witnesses, timelines. My desk became a battlefield of documents, contracts, and emails. Every piece of paper was a puzzle piece, every inconsistency a revelation. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth reclaiming its place. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. The shock of losing something they thought was secure. The realization that the world they built on lies was collapsing from within. When I finally moved, it wasn't dramatic. It was elegant. Every step aligned perfectly with the next, like clockwork. They didn't even see it coming. One moment, they were in control, surrounded by admiration and influence. The next, the ground beneath them was gone. I didn't need to shout, threaten, or destroy. I simply revealed what they'd tried so hard to hide. The truth did the rest. I didn't hurt them the way they hurt me. I didn't need to. They thrived on perception, on the illusion of power and perfection. So, I didn't take their money or their possessions. I took their image, their mask. I showed the world who they really were, stripped of charm and control. And that was enough. Watching their carefully crafted reputations crumble under the weight of their own deceit was justice in its purest form. They used manipulation as a weapon, but I used transparency as mine. They spoke in riddles and secrets. I spoke in facts and evidence. I didn't need to make them suffer. I just needed to let the truth breathe. And once it did, it spread like wildfire, consuming every falsehood they had ever built. There's a special kind of silence that follows exposure. Not peace, but realization. That's the silence they were left with. What they never understood was that real power doesn't come from control. It comes from integrity. They thought they could destroy me by taking away what I loved most, but all they did was reveal what I was capable of. Every trap they set became proof of their guilt. Every lie they told became fuel for my cause. My revenge wasn't cruel. It was symmetrical. I didn't destroy them. I let them destroy themselves. As their empire began to crumble, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about balance. They had taken too much for too long, and all I did was return the scales to their rightful place, watching them face the consequences. Wasn't satisfaction. It was justice. The kind that doesn't need applause or acknowledgement, just the quiet certainty that right had finally caught up to wrong. I took away their illusion of power because it was never real to begin with. It existed only as long as others believed in it. Once the truth came out, that illusion evaporated, leaving them exposed, fragile, and utterly human. The same people who once commanded fear were now met with indifference. And in that silence, not in their downfall, but in their irrelevance, my revenge was complete. Betrayal tried to break me, but it turned me into a leader. It stripped away my illusions, my trust, and every comfortable lie I once believed in. When you've been betrayed by the people you would have died for, something inside you shifts forever. You stop expecting fairness, you stop waiting for rescue. You start realizing that survival isn't about endurance, it's about transformation. What was meant to destroy me ended up reshaping me into something unrecognizable, something unbreakable. At first, I thought betrayal was the end of my story. I thought the pain would swallow me whole, that the emptiness would become permanent. But with every day that passed, the wound started to become something else, a source of clarity. It showed me who was real and who only pretended to be. It revealed how easily love can be used as a weapon, and how silence becomes complicity. In the ruins of everything I lost, I found the strength to start again. Not softer, but sharper. When you've been betrayed, you learn the anatomy of deceit. You learn the tone of false promises, the rhythm of manipulation, the exact moment when a smile becomes a mask. I began to see patterns not just in my life, but in the lives of others. The quiet victims, the unheard voices, the ones who were too scared to speak. That's when I realized my pain had a purpose. It wasn't meant to destroy me. It was meant to prepare me. I started to speak, first in whispers, then with conviction. My voice trembled, but it carried truth. And truth doesn't need perfection to be powerful. The more I spoke, the more others came forward. They shared their stories, their scars, their betrayals. What began as my healing turned into a collective awakening. I was no longer fighting just for myself. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel powerless. Leadership, I learned, doesn't come from authority. It comes from experience. You can't guide others through the fire unless you've walked through it yourself. Betrayal had burned me, but in that fire, I found my direction. I didn't need titles or recognition. I had purpose. I knew how it felt to be silenced, so I made sure no one around me ever felt that way again. I became the voice I once needed. I began to build something out of the wreckage, a space where truth was louder than fear, where people could stand without apology. Every person who joined me brought a piece of their own story, their own courage. Together, we were no longer victims of betrayal. We were proof of resilience. I realized leadership isn't about control. It's about connection. It's about showing others that they're not alone in their pain, that together we can rewrite what was meant to end us. There were moments when the memories came back. The lies, the manipulation, the coldness in their eyes. But instead of breaking me again, they reminded me of how far I'd come. I used to be afraid of being alone, but betrayal taught me that solitude can be sacred. It's where you rebuild. It's where you discover what truly matters. It's where you learn that leadership begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to save you. The same people who once underestimated me started to notice the change. I no longer sought their approval. I no longer explained myself. I didn't need the validation from those who had betrayed me. My strength came from something deeper, the unshakable knowledge that I had turned my pain into purpose. They had tried to silence me, but in doing so, they created the very voice that now refuses to be quiet. As I stood before others who had faced their own betrayals, I saw the same fire in their eyes that once flickered in mine. That's when I understood the real meaning of leadership. It's not about being followed, it's about igniting courage in others. Every story shared became a spark. Every act of truth became resistance. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were a movement. Now I don't just fight for myself. I fight for everyone who's ever been silenced. For every person who's ever been betrayed and told to move on. For every soul who's ever swallowed their truth to keep the peace. My fight isn't driven by revenge anymore. It's driven by justice. Because betrayal didn't end my story. It rewrote it. And through that rewrite, I found a purpose louder than pain. When I reclaimed my home, I didn't just win back a space. I reclaimed my dignity, my story, and my soul. That house had never been just walls and furniture to me. It was the physical proof of every dream I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, every night I stayed awake wondering if it was all worth it. When they tried to take it away, they weren't just stealing property. They were trying to erase my existence, to rewrite a story that I had bled to create. Taking it back wasn't just victory, it was resurrection. Walking through the front door again felt different this time. The air carried memories, laughter, betrayal, and the echoes of every argument that had left scars on my heart. But the silence that met me wasn't empty. It was powerful. It was the sound of reclaiming what had been stolen. Every creak in the floorboards reminded me that pain didn't erase belonging. My home had witnessed my fall, but now it would witness my rise. When I first lost it, I thought I had lost everything. I wandered through days in disbelief, trying to understand how something built with love could be taken by deceit. I blamed myself for trusting too much, for believing that family meant protection. But as time passed, I realized that reclaiming my home wasn't just about reversing an injustice. It was about restoring my faith in myself. I had to believe once again that I was worth fighting for. Every step toward reclaiming it was a battle. Legal fights, endless paperwork, whispers behind my back. There were moments I wanted to give up, moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But something inside me refused to surrender. That house wasn't just a possession. It was a piece of me. Letting go would have meant letting them win. So I fought, not out of anger, but out of defiance. I fought because I refused to be erased. The day I got the keys back, I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding them in my hand, feeling the metal press into my palm like a promise. It wasn't joy I felt. It was power. Quiet, steady, unshakable power. The kind that comes from surviving what was meant to break you. They had tried to humiliate me, to strip me of control. But in the end, I stood taller than their lies, holding the proof that I had won not through vengeance, but through endurance. As I walked through each room, I saw the ghosts of my past, the younger version of me who used to dream there, the broken one who once cried there, the fighter who planned her comeback there. Every version of me had lived within those walls, and now they all came together in one moment of reclamation. This wasn't just a return. It was a merging of everything I had been and everything I had become. I opened the windows wide and let the light flood in. The same rooms that once felt suffocating now breathed again. I didn't rush to redecorate out or erase what had been. I embraced it. Every mark, every memory, every imperfection was part of my story. I realized I didn't need a perfect home. I needed an honest one. And honesty had finally returned to these walls. Reclaiming my home taught me something deeper than victory. It taught me ownership of self. They could take my money, my reputation, even my peace for a while, but they couldn't take who I was. The fight had stripped me down to my essence and shown me that true power doesn't come from possession. It comes from persistence. This wasn't about four walls anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice. The people who had tried to take it watched from a distance, silent and stunned. They expected anger, maybe revenge. but all they saw was grace. Because by the time I got it back, I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The win wasn't about them, it was about me. I wasn't returning to what I had lost. I was walking into what I had become. When I stood in the center of that house, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just relief, it was rebirth. That home had seen my worst and my best. It had been taken, but not conquered. And as the sunlight touched the walls, I realized that what I had truly reclaimed wasn't just a place. It was my dignity, my story, and the unbreakable soul that had built it in the first place. Today, my mission isn't revenge, it's transformation. There was a time when all I could think about was payback, about making them feel the pain they had caused me. But somewhere along the way, I realized that revenge keeps you tied to your past, while transformation sets you free from it. I no longer wanted to live in reaction to what they did. I wanted to live in creation of what I could become. The fire that once burned for vengeance now burns for purpose, and that shift changed everything about who I am. I used to believe justice meant making others fall, but now I see that true justice is rising higher than they ever imagined you could. Transformation doesn't come from winning against others. It comes from winning against yourself, against the bitterness, the anger, and the temptation to become what hurt you. I learned that the greatest victory is not in destroying your enemies, but in refusing to let them define you. My scars no longer represent pain. They represent evolution. The path to transformation wasn't smooth or noble at first. It was messy, painful, and lonely. There were nights when I hated myself for forgiving, mornings when I questioned if growth was worth it. But transformation isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's choosing every day to be better than the version of you that was broken. Slowly, I began to realize that my story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about becoming the person I was meant to be because of it. I started to see my pain as a kind of teacher. Every betrayal taught me discernment. Every loss taught me endurance. Every silence taught me self-trust. The very things that once shattered me became the tools I now use to build others up. Transformation isn't born from comfort. It's born from chaos. You can't teach strength if you've never been weak. You can't guide others out of darkness if you've never walked through it yourself. There are still moments when the past whispers, when old wounds try to reopen, but now I listen to them differently. Instead of resentment, I hear reminders. Each one says, "You made it." Each one pushes me to use my voice for more than myself. I want my story to be proof that destruction can be a beginning, not an ending. That healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means turning pain into something useful, something powerful, something that lights the way for someone else. I want to be the light for those still standing in the dark. I know that place too well. The confusion, the hopelessness, the endless wondering of why me. I've stood there waiting for someone to tell me that it would all make sense one day. Now, I want to be that voice for others. Not because I have all the answers, but because I've lived through the questions. I felt the weight of silence, and I refuse to let anyone else carry it alone. Transformation isn't about forgetting the darkness. It's about learning to guide others through it. I used to think that healing meant leaving my pain behind, but now I know it means carrying it differently. It's not a burden anymore. It's a beacon. It reminds me of where I've been and why I must keep going. Every story I share, every truth I speak, is a small flame in someone else's night. The more I share, the more I see how many people are still trapped in silence, waiting for that one moment of truth to change everything. They don't need saving. They need to see what's possible. They need proof that pain doesn't have to end in bitterness. And if my story can be that proof, then every tear, every heartbreak, every sleepless night was worth it. That's what transformation truly means, turning suffering into strength that serves others. Now, when I look at the people around me, I don't see enemies or allies. I see reflections. I see those who are still fighting to find their light, those who are still trying to understand their worth after betrayal. I reach out, not with anger, but with empathy. Because transformation taught me that we rise higher when we lift others with us. The world doesn't change through revenge. It changes through renewal, through courage, through the choice to rebuild instead of retaliate. So I keep walking, carrying my light where darkness once lived. I don't seek revenge anymore, because revenge ends a story. Transformation rewrites it. I've learned that one act of truth, one word of courage, can be enough to shift an entire life. And if I can help even one person see that moment for themselves, then everything I endured has finally found its purpose.